All for your office. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Cynthia Brown. So Dr. Brown's going to tell us about how she got where she is. So I won't give you a whole lot of bio, but I will tell you that she's the director of the Division of Geriatric Gerontology and Palliative Care, and the Comprehensive Center for Healthy Aging. Thank you very much.
And I wasn't going to be a leader, just so you know. So you'll hear a bit of that story. So I actually want to start with a question to all of y'all. Does anybody know this book? Yeah, it's a great book for adults as well as kids. So I want you to think for a minute, and you don't have to share out loud unless you want to, but when you were 5, what did you want to be when you grew up? You remember back that far? Does anybody want to share what they wanted to be?
I want to be a whale trainer.
I love it. It's awesome. Anybody else?
I was going to be an astronaut, but it's too short.
Dream crushed. Anybody else?
I wanted to be a gymnast, but I was too tall.
Great. Anybody else?
I want to be a veterinarian.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I was going to be a ballerina. That didn't happen. And it wasn't short or tall, it was too fat. But that's a whole other story. So the point being that we all started someplace and had ideas about what we were going to be when we grew up. And one of the things that I hope you'll take away from this talk is that you're not done growing up yet, and that you need to leave yourself open to possibilities, because there are lots of things that you could be when you grow up. And I think being a geriatrician helps me because I see people who are in their 80s and 90s and are still growing and changing. And so I'm hoping that when you leave here, you will keep that in the back of your mind when you're busy doing your tunnel vision things, that there's a whole big world out there, and you don't want to get too narrow in your vision. So my career actually started in high school when I took an aptitude test. Does anybody remember taking those? I may be dating myself. I may not do those anymore. So my aptitude test said that I could be either a hairdresser or a physical therapist. Those were the two top ones. Now clearly there must have been something about being chatty in there. That there must have been questions about being extroverted and enjoying people. So that was the first time that I actually thought about what I might want to do. And so I actually did explore the physical therapy because it wasn't something I knew anything about. My mom was a nurse. We had no doctors in our family. And so I really didn't have any experience. I just knew I did not want to do what my mom did. That was not going to happen. So I had the opportunity to do some volunteer work, got exposed to physical therapy, and thought, yeah, I kind of like this. And I really liked the hospital. It was one of those places where there was always stuff going on. There was always stuff to do. You could be busy, and by the way, you got to talk to a lot of people, which to me was like really great. So made the decision that I was going to go to PT school. So off I go to PT school. And I really did enjoy being a physical therapist. I did like the patient interaction. I liked that there was lots of one-on-one, and you could really make a difference in somebody's life. But somewhere after about 10 years, I started thinking about, well, what else? I started looking around to see whether there was something else that I might like to do. The other thing that happened at around this same time was that I went through a divorce. And we didn't have any children. And all of a sudden, I had been the person who was basically carrying the load for the two of us, and suddenly I could do whatever I wanted. I was free. And so I really started to think about, all right, do I want to stick with this PT? Do I want to get a PhD? I could certainly do that. Or are there other options? And that's when I decided that I was going to go to medical school. You know, you can question my sanity. There probably were parts of it that were a little crazy. But I think what was positive about this was that I took something that could have been quite devastating and turned it into something that was actually really positive for me. It gave me goals, it gave me something to work towards, but it wasn't an easy transition. There were a lot of hurdles to trying to get into medical school. So the first was, I was working a full-time job at Duke as a PT, but I needed to take prerequisite courses that I hadn't had during physical therapy school, particularly 10, 12 years before. So things had changed. And so I needed to be able to go back to school. But I'm working this full-time job. So I actually gave up my job at Duke and did home health physical therapy, which meant I controlled my hours. And so I could be really busy one day and not busy another day to be able to fit it in. It also meant doing things like biochemistry. So who remembers taking biochemistry? Did it suck? Yes, it sucked. It really sucks at 30. It's bad enough in your 20s. It's really bad when you're in your 30s. It was just hard. And it was all new. There was nothing in there that was familiar. So I finally get all my little prerequisite courses. I put in my applications. And I got some interviews, but I didn't get accepted the first go-round. I thought, what the heck? So I was close to UNC at the time. And so I went in and I met with the dean and I said, you know, I want to know, how do I make my application better? Because I'm coming back. And she, you know, blah, blah, blah a little bit. And the bottom line was, what they were looking to see was I persistent? It's just like grants, right? Same thing. They're looking to see if you're persistent. They're getting ready to invest a whole lot of time, money, a slot on you. They don't want you to get in there and say, you know, I changed my mind. I'm going to go do something else. So they forced me to demonstrate my persistence just the way that you are going to be forced as you put in grants, as you turn in papers, and they send them back, and you think, did you read it? Like, where did you get this critique, right? But what do? You get mad, you stop around, you only get a day to do that, right? One day. And then you go back and you're persistent because the science is good and they're just idiots. And so you just have to work around the idiots, right? So it was the same thing for me trying to get into medical school. So was able to get into med school. Let me move on to my next slide. So to be in academia, you really got to believe in yourself because it is hard. It is not an easy path. And yet what you're doing is so important. So you do have to believe in yourself. I knew I could do this. I knew they were wrong. Just like when my grants don't get accepted, they're just wrong. I just have to fix it so that they understand it better. And while in medical school, which I won't go into, I found geriatrics. Now, it's not a big surprise that geriatrics was something that I was interested in, right? I came out of physical therapy. Who do you take care of? You take care of lots of older adults. But what you have to know is that I went into med school thinking I was going to be primary care, family medicine. Got into third year and found that family medicine docs have to know like all this stuff and they know a little about a ton of stuff. That doesn't suit my personality at all. So I chose internal medicine, little narrower, little deeper, but not dramatically, and then found geriatrics. I chose my residency program based on the geriatrics and arrived at Yale, started doing my internship, my residency, and I had told my husband that, I remarried along the way. He's a lot more supportive, as you will see. I told him, we'll be at Yale for 3 years, and then we'll look for something back in the South, because he really prefers to live in the South. So second year of residency, I get asked to interview to be one of the chief residents. Well, you can't say no when they ask you to do that. So I came home and I said, well, what do you think? And he's like, oh, that sounds like you really need to do that. And I'm like, yes, I really do. So I interviewed and was chosen to be a chief. So now we're there 4 years. And then during my third year, I started interviewing for geriatric fellowships. And I interviewed at Duke and, all these nice southern places, and of course at Yale. And I came home in tears. And I said, Yale's the right place for me to be. It has the right mentors. I'm going to get what I need, but it means 3 more years up here. So I promised 3. He ended up with 7. But it was okay because it was what I needed to do for my career. And then we scuttled out of the Northeast as quickly as possible and got here. So this is my first job out of fellowship. I've been here almost 15 years. I've had lots of mentors along the way, and y'all know about mentors. And I pick mentors up as I go along. That there are lots of people who can teach you different things. And so I am always open to sort of hooking up with people, learning what I can. Sometimes they stay in my stable, other times they disappear. But don't think of the mentorship relationship as always being a one-to-one. That there are people that can teach you things that you don't necessarily even know that you need to know. I continue to do all the stuff that you're supposed to do in terms of writing grants and papers and that kind of stuff. And I really was enjoying what I was doing. And I had lucked into, and I do say it's serendipity, that I landed in hospital mobility. So that's my area of research interest. And the way that happened was someone at Yale had a data set. She had been thinking about mobility and the impact of mobility. So asked me to come on board. I started writing this paper with her, had this great data set, and we demonstrated for the first time that there was an association between how much people got up in the hospital and their outcomes. It's like a no-brainer. Like, why hadn't somebody written this up before? But nobody had. There was no literature on it. And that actually launched my career. And the point of that for you is you don't know what is going to be your thing. You don't know what is going to be the thing that shoots your star up into the heavens, because it may not be what you think it's going to be. So you have to be open. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to read and see, you know what, there is absolutely no literature on this. And so that became my thing. And having a PT background made me the perfect person to be the one yelling about this. And what is fascinating is that in 17 years, from when I first published a paper on this to now, what we are seeing is in hospitals, people are trying to figure out how to get people up and moving. They're doing things like having aids and that kind of stuff. Nobody was even thinking about it 17 years ago. So I had no idea that's the impact that I would have, but that's what happened. And so you don't know what your impact is going to be either. So be wide open. So the other thing is that you do have to be assertive, and for some of us that's a challenge. I think that there are some gender challenges for some of us. Others of us are more introverted, and so being assertive is, or being going after opportunity may feel uncomfortable. So I want to share a story with you about an interaction that I had with someone who ended up being a mentor. She was at Pittsburgh. She also was at the NIH, a real stellar investigator. Her name is Stephanie Studensky. And I wanted to meet Stephanie Studensky because I'd read all her work and I was just so impressed with her. And I had a friend who knew her. I said, oh, you need to introduce me. At the next meeting, we need to be introduced. So she drove me over and I got to meet Stephanie and we interacted a bit, and come to find out we had a connection, and that was Duke. She had been there actually when I was there, although I never met her. So we had a connection. It also allowed me to give my little 30-second, oh, well, I started like this physical therapist, and now I'm a geriatrician, and so I had my little elevator speech so that she knew who I was. About 6 weeks later, she emailed me and said, would you be interested in working on a book chapter with me? Yeah, absolutely. So I answered back and I did everything I was supposed to. And that escalated from that book chapter, which was not a great one, to writing what is the premier book chapter on rehabilitation for geriatrics and gerontology. But it was that connection. And if she hadn't met me, if I hadn't gotten my friend to introduce, or if I had not just pushed myself right on up there and said, hey, I've read everything you've ever written, I'm really happy to meet you, that wouldn't have happened. And that was an important cornerstone. So what I would encourage you to do is think about who are the people that you would like to meet, and how do you navigate to be able to meet them. And one of the tricks is everybody likes to talk about themselves. It's just a fact. So if you give them an opportunity to tell you more about themselves, they'll take it. So think about how you can go up and say, hey, I just read your whatever paper. Tell me more about X. They will. And they'll remember you because you made them feel good. And that's important. I told you I started with family med, then internal medicine, and geriatrics, but I had no intention of being a leader. I was going to work in the community, then I was going to work in academics, but I didn't want to be in charge, not interested. But what I found was that every time there was an opportunity to lead, I was the first one in line. What the heck is this? How did I get here again? So clearly there was something going on that I needed to pay attention to. And I started to actually develop that part of myself. I did leadership courses. There's lots of options for those. And I spent time thinking about what brings me joy. What do I enjoy doing the most? When I have a day where it's like, this was an awesome day, like this was the best day ever, I would actually stop and think about what made it the best day ever. And I would encourage you to do the same, because I know you have days where it's like, this was the best day ever, and then there are days like, this day I just shouldn't have gotten out of bed. Like, it was bad. From start to finish, this was a bad day. So what makes it bad? And the reason that you want to spend time doing that is that that will help you figure out what brings you joy. Because the things that make you happy are what you really want to do as a job, because then it doesn't feel like work. It's just coming and doing the things that you love. So for me, I love to mentor. I really enjoy that interaction, that one-on-one, that opportunity to think. I love having mentees that do things that are different from me because it allows me to think about things that I don't normally think about. I also like problem solving, which is why I kept landing in the leadership thing, because that's what leaders do. People come and they say, we have a problem, and your job is to try and figure out how to fix it. So I would encourage you to think about what makes you happy, what are the things you like to do. You know, if you hate writing grants, that's a problem if that's what you're going to have to do for a living, right? So you have to figure out how to find joy in that. And maybe there's a way around that. Maybe you get a partner who likes to do the writing. You know, there are ways to work around it. I'm betting that every one of you likes to think creatively, or you wouldn't be here. So how do you capture that? How do you continue to do that for the rest of your life? Because that's really what you want to do. So I'm a big Sandberg fan, and one of the things that I personally struggled with was holding myself back. And for those of you who read Lean In, that's what her book is all about, is, you know, are you sitting at the table, or are you sitting on the outskirts and not being part of the group? Are you leaning in and saying, I'll do it? And that's something that's been a challenge for me and something that I've really worked to do, because I think it's really important for us to have women that are leaders. And so even though it feels uncomfortable, I've gotten better and better at it along the way. So for me, this is a quote that I pay very close attention to. Leadership-wise, I had the opportunity to become the section head of geriatrics, and I took it. I only had 14 faculty that I was responsible for, and that was enough, because there were all sorts of things that were going on. It was clinical faculty, and there was just stuff that was happening. And I learned things about myself. I learned my triggers. I learned what I'm gifted in and what, man, I just do not need to be doing. So I am not really good at details. I am super big picture, love flying at 30,000 feet, 50,000 feet is actually better, but don't pull me into the weeds. I'm not good in the weeds, but I know I need people that are good in the weeds. So that's who I surround myself with. And their job is to say, okay, it's a really great idea, Cynthia, but like, how are you going to do that? So they make me come up with the game plan. Because otherwise I'd just be up there flying, going, oh, we could do this, and we could do this, and wouldn't it be great? Then I had the opportunity to become the division director, and I took it. They had a whole interview process, and they got all these people from the outside, but I knew that I was the right person, so I sold myself, and they bought it. But it was a challenge because the leader who had been in this position before me had been here for 23 years. Every single faculty member, he was the only leader they had known. And so I came into a situation with all these ideas, because I've already told you I'm an idea generator, and all these ideas about how I can change things. And I have a boatload of people who are like, don't do anything. We're good, just like we are. Don't mess with things, right? But if you've been paying attention to what's happening around us, things are changing whether you want them to change or not. Academic medical centers are different than they were even 5 years ago. And 5 years from now, they're going to be even more different. So life is moving on. And so I've had to learn how to chill out my natural, let's go, and I've learned how to coax and move people along, which is a key leadership skill, but it's one that isn't just innate. You have to learn how to get your people on board. I moved people around on the bus so that they were in the right positions, and we are now poised to head off into the future. I didn't expect to be here. I was going to be a ballerina, right? So give yourself opportunities, take them when they're offered, make them if they're not offered, and find what makes you happy. And I'll stop there and answer any questions. Everybody's going to be quiet.
I'll start.
All right.
So, what was the hardest thing for you going from being sort of one of the faculty to being the director?
Great question. For me, the hardest part is you're lonely. So when you are part of the faculty, you get to stand around the water cooler and chit-chat, gossip, talk. You know, you are one of the team. When you are the leader, people become much more guarded about what they tell you, about how they interact with you, because now you're the boss. And I don't think I appreciated that I was going to basically lose my work support group, and that I was going to actually have to create new support groups for myself. That caught me off guard. Great question. Yeah.
Do you have any ideas, tricks, thoughts about work-life balance, which I know is kind of a cliche term, but the idea, I mean, it seems like people in academics just work 18 hours a day all the time. How do you carve out time for yourself, protected time?
Yes. I am learning how to make that happen, because I am so much better when I do that. So what I do in my calendar is I actually have thinking time. Because if I'm supposed to lead this division and I'm supposed to come up with great ideas, I can't do it if I'm drowning in work. So I actually put it into the calendar, and it is sacred. Nobody stomps on my thinking time. The other thing is that I have learned to take time for myself. Again, because I have seen that I am so much more productive, and if all I'm doing is being busy, and we're very into busy, and if you think about productivity versus busy, I'm very productive, but I'm not busy. So I'm taking voice lessons as an example. I've always wanted to do it, and you know, is it going to directly impact my role as a division director? Well, probably not. But am I happier because I'm doing it? Yes. And so because I'm happier, I have more to give. And I think that that's what we're missing, is if you don't tank back up, that's why we're seeing burnout at 50%. That's what's going on, is that we are not taking the time. And so I think it's important as a leader that my people know, today I'm leaving at 4 o'clock because I have a voice lesson, period. That's just the way it is. And I want them to do the same. So some of it, unfortunately, comes from the top. And when your boss sends you an email at 4 a.m., it's very hard not to respond to that by sending one back at 4:01. But I think that we have to draw our own boundaries and say, I'm not crossing this, because I'm not going to be as good for you if you don't let me have my breathing time, my thinking time. So.
First, I wanted to say thank you for that, because I've been around a lot of people that work way too many hours, and I like 8, 8, 8, sleep 8 hours, work 8 hours, and have fun for 8 hours.
I'm hanging with you.
But one of the things that you mentioned is like you don't know where that start is gonna happen for you. but it has taken 15 years for people to use the knowledge that you initially published, which is the norm
That's
for medicine, right? But how did you know that that was the thing?
For me,
Or you know, how did you identify? I'm like, oh, maybe this is greater and better than what I initially thought.
yeah. I think some of that goes to the passion. So this was something, this whole concept of hospital mobility was something that got me excited, that every time I talked about it, I was fired up about it. And so even if it didn't lead to these dramatic changes that we're seeing, for me, it was what lit my fire. And so I needed to go after it. And I just knew that in my heart that that's what I needed to focus on. And so I think you have to try things on and see, you know, how do they make you feel? And also, my family would say, God, every time you start talking about that crap, you get all excited. No, there's, you know, like, oh, okay, I'll try and tone it down, but I am excited about it because it's important. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. So it's your gut. And you had a question?
Oh, to the sort of carving out time for things other than academics. So, how do we change that culture? And I feel like part of it's gendered, right? So I feel like part of it is, you know, that there's a sort of like women want to do other stuff. This stereotype, women want to do other stuff, and men are like work. Which I don't think is entirely true, but I think that's sort of how the dynamics sometimes play out. So how do we sort of get that?
Yeah. So I think that some of it will actually happen as the Xers and the millennials move into more positions of power. Because Xers have been talking about work-life balance since they got to work. That's been their thing. I'm a very late boomer. Boomers as a group tend to be very work-focused. So I think that part of it will just happen because the people coming through are going to be like, yeah, I'm not doing that. No, and oh, by the way, I'm in charge. So no, we're not doing that. So I think part of it will happen there. I think the other thing is that we all have to learn, and I didn't come back to your work-life balance. I did the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, which is a women's leadership program, phenomenal year-long fellowship. And one of the things that they talked about was work-life integration. And so the key being that, you know, you're at work, but you need to exercise. So at lunch, instead of sitting over your computer doing more work, you get your butt up and you go for a 30-minute walk on the campus. Or they actually had us do a project where we had to hit all 4 areas. It was self, it was work, it was family, and I can't remember what the 4th one was. And so I picked the Alzheimer's disease, it was community. It was Alzheimer's disease walk. So I got in my exercise for me, I drugged my husband to take pictures, I got all my faculty to join me, and it was clearly a fundraiser for the community. So thinking creatively about what the kinds of things are that you want to be able to do, and how can you meet multiple needs by doing whatever it is. So that's the other thought. Yes.
I have a question. I'm a little different. I'm a pre-doc, so I'm working on my PhD in clinical psychology.
You would be always.
Yes, ma'am. I'm wondering, I'm curious, how do you set boundaries? So I've got a lab manager who I do adore, but if you give her an inch, she will take a mile, and suddenly your lunch break is no more, your dinner break is no more, you're coming in at 6, you know, it's just like, she'll schedule you as many hours as you allow her one time. So it kind of builds and builds.
Mhm.
And I feel like the times I've tried to be like, I need this time to exercise for 30 minutes or cook dinner or, do things that I really enjoy doing, there's a little bit of pushback. Well, why did you do it last week and now you can't do it? Why are you all of a sudden so busy?
Mhm.
So I'm wondering how you kind of approach that.
And it's going to take training. So this is just like when I get a new assistant, that these are the rules. And the way we've worked it out is these are the rules, period. If we're going to break the rules, so now it's become an abnormal, right? I want you to talk to me about it, and I have to decide whether we're going to break the rules. But it's only a one-time break. And then we go back to what is the standard schedule, which means I get to be home and cook, I get to do my exercise, I get to do the stuff I want to do. So I think it's flipping it so that what she's doing where she's scheduled it, that's the abnormal.
Okay.
So, and then you got to stick to your guns.
Yeah.
So, because obviously you're going to feel this. So you're going to have to be able to say, yeah, no, that's not going to work for me.
Okay.
So, good.
Is that true pushing upstream as well as downstream?
Yeah, you just have to be carefuler. But definitely, you can learn to manage your leader. You just have to be smart about it because obviously there's power involved, and so how you do it, you don't have to tell them you're going for voice lessons. You can just tell them that you already had another appointment. Like it's how much you divulge to the leader. So, but absolutely.
Can I say one thing? I just finished my post-up and I'm transitioning into another position. But during my post-up, one thing that I noticed is that people are not counting how many times you say no. As long as you're productive and you do what you have to do, because for me, it's like, oh my God, I said no last week and I'm saying no again. And it's like, well, for the most part, if it's something that they're offering and it's not a requisite, they truly don't count.
It sounds like you had a number of I guess, opportunities to explore entering a new environment in your career versus staying in the same environment that you've been in. Can you speak a little more to how you decided or what kind of things went into determining, this is the best place for me? So first of all, it is a crapshoot. Nothing's guaranteed. I've just presented you rosy, but who knows what I could have done if I had chosen differently. And so that's rearview mirror thinking, and you can't go there. Once you make a decision, you just gotta move on with what you got. And I think for me, it really had to do with where I found joy. What were the things that I really loved to do? And if I can do more of those, then it makes it worth moving in whatever direction I needed to move to get that. So, and I'm a big go with your gut girl. I know myself very well. And so for me, decisions like that aren't hard because I just know what feels right. That doesn't help you at all. Because you're going to have to know you and know what is going to feel right for you. Yeah. Other questions?
Did you know that you were into research from your residency? Or
Oh, hell no.
fellowship?
I didn't want to do that either. I went to that kicking and screaming. Yeah, I was going to be a clinician educator. That was my game plan. And I did this 3-year fellowship, and the way they talked me into the 3-year fellowship, because I could have done a 1-year, was that they told me that it would be a great opportunity, and even if I wanted to be a clinician educator, having that research background would be good for me. And I bought it. And I got into it and just loved the thinking, and again, it's creative problem solving, it's being able to walk all around the problem and try and figure out what the best way to fix it is. And so I was captivated. And I don't mind writing, you know, like for me that helps me clarify. So for me, writing wasn't a big deal. But what I really loved was the brainstorming, thinking about problems, and that's how they hooked me. The other was that I realized when I'm in a patient room, it's one-on-one, and I'm changing that patient's life. But with research, you can change the world. And so that grabbed my attention. Yeah. Other questions? Let me off pretty easy. All right. Great. Yes?
Was there a time where you were just sure that day that you were gonna quit academia?
And happens on a regular basis.
And then, like, why didn't you? Because clearly you could, I mean, you could be a clinician and have a decent living and all of that, but why?
Yes, yes. And that goes to passion. Where my gifts are best is in the academic environment. The academic environment needs me, even when they make me crazy. The entity needs people like me, who are passionate about what we do, who want to mentor, who want to teach, who want to do it all. And so at the end of the day, with a glass of wine, you know, when I step back and think, okay, so you pull yourself out of that environment. Is that what's best for me? Probably not. And it's definitely not what's best for UAB. So I stick. Even when they cut my budget, I stick. You know, like it's just the way it is. So.
To kind of speak to that, I think it's the power of small wins. So it talks about research as it's long term, right? It takes 15 years for you see, you know, things to happen. So for me, like at the beginning of my fellowship was kind of really rough. I felt like I wasn't accomplishing anything. So I took on rows somewhere else, and it was like, oh, at the end of the week, I'd accomplished all of this. So it's kind of those small wins along the way that keep you going for the bigger picture.
Absolutely, I agree. The other thing I do is I actually journal. And I was taught this by a coach. And what you do is write down at the end of the day what went well. And you only have to write one thing, what went well, and what would you have done differently if you had the opportunity. And I have learned so much about myself from that exercise, and it forces you to think about the small wins, because you go through a day and it feels like all you did was met with like everybody, and everybody was whiny. Because that's what being a leader is. Everybody comes in and dumps the problems, right? But you have one interaction that was good, and you write it down, then it sort of validates the day. So even like it didn't feel like a good day, but I did this, and that helps. So. I think I'm off the hook. Yeah.
Hello, it's your greeter. I'm not standing blocking the door today. I'm over here. Just a couple announcements. Becky Rainey again. I work with CCTS in the Training Academy. If you're planning to go to ACTS, or any of you planning to go, or TS 18, I think is also what it's called. The meeting in Washington, D.C. is also, you're going to go? Great. Oh, okay. Well, if you are, please let me know. It is April 17th, and then I'm just collecting a list from all of our partner network. And if you are interested, we have the T32s, Steve Whitney, and some others here today. So we're going to walk up and look at a space in FOT for you guys if y'all are interested in walking up now. We have a meeting up there, but it's on FOT 7. So our new space for you guys to check it out. All right, any questions, any comments? Okay, thank you all for coming today. You got it.